are going to move on into the program. It's my now honor to introduce the Deputy Secretary-General of the United Nations, Ms. Amina Mohammed. Okay. Pardon me. We've got some changes here. We're trying to work it all out. Okay. We are not going to go there. We are now going to go to... okay. Okay. We are going to go to the President of the General Assembly, His Excellency Peter Thompson, to now deliver remarks. Thank you so much.
Well, Deputy Secretary General, good morning, and Executive Director of UN Women, and Excellencies and distinguished guests, welcome to the United Nations, to all of you who are visiting here. It's a great pleasure to see you all in such great numbers and so much red in the room, too. It's a great honor to be here today to mark the observance of International Women's Day, and I thank UN Women. Morning, Prime Minister.
Good morning.
And I thank UN Women for organizing this event. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, when the suffragettes took the streets over 100 years ago to demand equality for women, it was their actions that led to the first observance of International Women's Day. Sitting here today, it's difficult to accept that over a century later, women and their allies still have to march in the streets to demand recognition of fundamental human rights. Therefore, we meet today to celebrate the positive developments that have taken place over the years in the promotion and protection of women's and girls' human rights. Let us pause as we do so to recognize that this progress has often been slow, fragile, and uneven. Let us also remind ourselves that if we are to achieve a future in which all women and men enjoy equal rights and empowerment and opportunity, then we must commit to decisive action to overcome the entrenched obstacles still preventing progress. The theme of this year's International Women's Day, Women in the Changing World of Work, Planet 50-50 by 2030, brings focused attention to a critical driver of gender equality, that is, women's economic empowerment. While in recent years the gender gap in the labor force participation has narrowed across the globe, at the current rate of progress, the World Economic Forum estimates it will take 170 years to close the economic gender gap. If we're serious about achieving Planet 50-50 by 2030, it is clear we must take specific action now to accelerate the realization of gender equality. We must ensure that no one is left behind. In other words, that these efforts must take place within all nations at all levels. As a starting point, it's time for action on promoting and protecting women and girls' equal rights before the law, within societies and inside all workplaces. This includes by providing workplace protections and ensuring equal pay for equal work. We must challenge narrow gender stereotypes, societal expectations, and chauvinistic attitudes that constrain choices for women and girls. We must expand opportunities in education, employment, and the formal economy, including pursuing strategies to increase women's participation in innovation, science and technology, and other emerging industries from which they have traditionally been marginalized. Such efforts are particularly important as we seek to respond to the changing world of work, where technological advancements, demographic shifts, and globalization are fundamentally altering the jobs and job requirements of the future. We must introduce policies within our workplaces to overcome entrenched male bias and address the underrepresentation of women at senior levels. This includes by stamping out negative workplace cultures, providing adequate family leave, and ensuring that women have clear paths to elevate them into senior decision-making roles. We must collect, analyze, and use disaggregated statistical information so that policymakers are able to make targeted, evidence-based decisions to drive, monitor, evaluate, and strengthen women's workplace participation rates. And most importantly, we must implement the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The 2030 Agenda and the 17 Sustainable Development Goals it contains are critical tools for the realization of human rights of all women and girls. The 2030 Agenda not only sets the goal of achieving gender equality within the next 14 years under SDG 5, But it also recognizes that to achieve all of the 17 SDGs, we must pursue the empowerment of women and girls as key cross-cutting priority. We must therefore look to the implementation of the SDGs urgently, effectively, and at scale, and to ensure that women and women's groups are key partners in shaping our implementation plans so that the particular needs of women and girls are addressed in the implementation process. The United Nations has a critical role to play in driving global momentum to implement the 2030 Agenda and thereby achieve gender equality. This includes through leading by example and making the shift towards achieving a gender-equal organization here in New York and in our bases around the world. With statistics showing that only 3 women have served as the President of the General Assembly over the last 71 sessions, and that only 2 women have served as President of ECOSOC, and that as recently as last year's UN General Debate, only 18 of the 197, there should be 193 national statements were delivered by women, we must take a good look at ourselves and take the necessary steps to promote women into leadership positions within our organization. The Secretary-General's groundbreaking institutional reform effort to achieve gender parity throughout the organization is vital to reversing this historical imbalance. And those of you who were here at the beginning of the 71st session will be aware that in the 40 people that I appointed to the office of the President of the General Assembly for this session, gender parity was achieved in the staffing of that office. I call on all delegations to support the Secretary-General in his work towards gender parity in this organization, to help him embed the reforms into the organizational culture and to ensure that a pipeline of women's talent is nurtured within the UN system. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, when I committed to become an advocate for the he for she, I recognized this was more than a catchy title. Rather, it was a public undertaking to take action in my day-to-day life to create a more gender-equal world. I'm committed to this cause, like other he-for-she males, and in doing so, to do all that I can to promote gender equality, particularly as we look at ways to implement game-changing initiatives to achieve those 17 Sustainable Development Goals. As part of my commitment to driving a universal push to implement all 17 SDGs during the 71st session, over the coming months I'll be convening a series of SDG action events on climate change, SDG financing, innovation, and education. During each of these events, special focus will be placed on advancing gender equality and leaving no one behind. I encourage everyone here today to participate in these events and to ensure that intersectional and cross-cutting issues relating to women's rights are addressed in all discussions. Details on the SDG action events can be found on the website of the Office of the President of the General Assembly. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I want to pay tribute to all the women and women's groups and women's human rights defenders from around the world who, through their daily acts of courage and commitment, stand up for the rights of women and girls. I want to thank you. And I want to thank you for your determined pursuit of equity to not only improve the lives of all women and girls, but in turn to achieve a more just and peaceful world for us all. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and thank you for not falling into just the catchy title. You know, we need people at the top who are making clear paths to elevate women into these senior roles, into leadership positions. So, on behalf of the women here who are involved at the UN, many thank yous. And now it's my honor to introduce the Deputy Secretary-General of the United Nations, Ms. Amina J. Mohammed. She is the highest-ranking woman in the United Nations system. Ms. Amina Mohammed.
Thank you. Your Excellency, the Prime Minister Benediktsson of Iceland, Mr. President of the General Assembly, our boss, distinguished colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and especially the young women in the audience today. I'm truly honored to be with you to celebrate this most important day, and I use that word really carefully and deliberately. Every day and in every way, we must celebrate women. and we must respect and honor their contribution to today's world and to a better future for all humanity. As partners and mothers and caregivers, as political and business leaders, as agents of change, and as pioneers for equality. The 2030 Agenda recognizes that women and girls are indispensable for durable peace, true justice, and sustainable development. Where women and girls are held back and subjugated, societies suffer. When they advance, societies advance with them. And that is why gender equality and empowerment for women and girls is a subject that we have for Development Goal 5 and embedded throughout the 2030 Agenda. It is also why the needs and the priorities of women and girls are enshrined in the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, the 1325 Global Review on Women, Peace and Security, and the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. Collectively, these global commitments constitute a historic gender equality compact. Planet 50-50 by 2030, so now, with your help, we need to get to work. The clock is ticking, and we women are impatient. It is more than 2 decades. It is more than 2 decades since we heard the clarion call that women's rights are human rights in Beijing. It sounds obvious, even banal, to even have to say it. But when we look around, we see a profound gap between aspiration and reality. Women's rights and opportunities are consistently neglected and even under threat in all regions. Sexism and misogyny are alive and thriving. Everywhere we see tradition, cultural values, and religion being used to hold women and girls back. Their rights over their own bodies are questioned and undermined. Women and girls are routinely targeted for intimidation and harassment online and in real life. Violence against women and girls is a continuing pandemic. Extremists and terrorists preach the subjugation of women and girls, and they are fleeing in record numbers. Half the world's 244 million migrants and 19.6 million refugees are female. But just as pernicious are the entrenched habits and attitudes of too many societies, and unfortunately, too many men. Just look around at who are sitting in governments and in boardrooms. Do we see equality? Rarely. This is why the Secretary-General has been very clear about his commitment to work for gender parity at the United Nations, for justice and for the opportunity of women and girls around the world. And that is why his message for this year's International Women's Day has focused on empowerment. Because in denying the rights of women and girls, it's not simply wrong in itself. It has serious social and economic impacts that hold us all back. When women and girls have full access to education and health services, their rights, the benefits of families and communities reverberate for generations. And when women participate fully in the labor force, we see dynamism and growth. And today I was being told that the locked up 28 trillion in GDP could unlock many trillions if only women were in decision-making roles and in the workplace. And so that is why we absolutely must fight for Planet 50-50 by 2030 or even earlier. The Secretary-General and myself and everyone on this podium are truly committed to do everything we can to achieve this objective. I'm also humbled to be in a role where I can help inspire action and for gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. And I cannot think of a cause that I would be more proud and humbled to serve. Today, let us save a thought for the Chibok girls and the thousands of women and girls that have been lost to the horror of terrorism and extreme violence and conflict. Finally, I would like to wish all of you, women and girls, men and boys of the world, a joyous, empowering International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now I'd like to introduce His Excellency, Mr. Bjarni Benediktsson, the Prime Minister of Iceland. He's been a steadfast partner for gender equality and a he-for-she impact champion. Please.
Mrs. Deputy Secretary-General, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here with you today to celebrate the International Women's Day. It's a day of reflection and a reminder that while we have made progress, our work for equality and women's empowerment must continue. As we know, we have set ourselves ambitious global goals, and gender equality and women's empowerment will be key to reaching those goals. Only with the active participation of women at all levels can we eliminate hunger and poverty and ensure a safe and prosperous future for all of us. I am aware of the tendency to think gender equality is a women's topic, but we know better. Gender equality benefits all of us. I am convinced that the Icelandic experience can be of value for others. Iceland repeatedly ranks #1 in the world for gender equality. Over the past few decades, increased respect for women's human rights and their active economic and political participation has increased well-being and prosperity in Iceland. Our progress, however, did not happen overnight. President Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, the first democratically elected female head of state, was an important pioneer on this journey. So were many women in politics, including the Women's Alliance, who broke the male parliamentary dominance in 1983. A whole generation grew up in Iceland, watching women political leaders in the media, and now Iceland has one of the most gender-equal parliaments in the world for countries not using electoral gender quotas. Political parties have taken different paths to increasing women's participation. Some have used quotas, others don't, but all have found that there is no shortage of qualified women leaders. We find that even though Iceland ranks #1, there is not only space to improve, but we must continue and show more improvement. When it is no longer news that we have a woman in a leading position, then and only then we have reached parity. In many fields, we've taken specific measures to accelerate progress. Quality daycare and generous parental leave for mothers and fathers have helped increase equality in the home and in the workplace. We have implemented gender quotas for company boards and public committees, introduced gendered budgeting, and taken specific steps to eliminate gender-based violence. Furthermore, we are making efforts to reduce the gender pay gap. That's one of the main agendas of my government, because it still exists. And now we are doing it with the help of the so-called equal pay standard. It's a tool for employers to prevent any kind of discrimination in compensation, professional advancement, or other terms. As a part of our He4She commitments, we've set our mind on achieving equal pay for equal work of equal value by 2022. And my government intends to implement a legislation to require larger firms and state institutions to have their equal pay system certified. Ladies and gentlemen, to achieve full gender equality, men and boys must be part of the solution. To give men and boys a platform for dialogue, we have developed a so-called barbershop toolbox to enable to organize barbershop events. And we strongly encourage men and boys everywhere to become part of the conversation and enable them to become agents of change. by better understanding how gender inequality limits the ability of individuals to reach their full potential. This was one of our commitments as He4C champions, and I'm happy to launch the toolbox officially here. It's here. I would like to hand this over to UN Women's Director Pumcili. And let me just say at the same time, well, let's open it up. It's all in here. Oops. That's the way to do it. It's the other way around. So, thank you, Pumcili, and your staff for the inspiration and cooperation. Please join me in applauding UN Women and all women around the world. Yeah, the tools are there. So the toolbox will be available on the He4C website as a key resource for those searching for ways to take action. So you don't really need to get a box like this. It's all on the website. But it's good to have one in your garage. Every home needs one, that's true. Ladies and gentlemen, an important part of the equation is to promote equality in the home and being a positive role model for your children and your colleagues alike. As a father of 4, the active role I have been able to play in my children's lives is priceless. It's a privilege, and it was not granted to my parents or my father in the same way as it has been to me or to his father, for that sake. All of us have so much to gain from equality, both personally and in society as a whole. We can change the discourse among men to be more respectful towards women and actually towards ourselves. We cannot live by some predetermined masculinities. We should all be free of stereotyping and discrimination. On a personal note, I am a strong proponent of breaking stereotypes as they limit our personal potential and freedom. My contribution is my knack for cake decoration. That's the reason why my hands are this pink. I did make a cake for the International Women's Day, which I handed over. So it won't fit in the toolbox, but she already has it. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's an honor for me to be among the He4C Impact Champions, and I am determined to promote gender equality as a topic that concerns all of us, men and women, not only in Iceland, but around the world. I wish you a successful, fun, and powerful International Women's Day. Thank you.
The Prime Minister of Iceland, cake decoration, who knew? Now we just need to hand out their barbershop toolbox to all the men here in the room. Thank you, Prime Minister. And now to a woman who has chosen to lend her voice to the very important issue of parental leave and the consequences of unequal burden of care work in the home as one of the key barriers to gender equality. She is an American award-winning actor and advocate for gender equality in her own right. As part of her humanitarian efforts, she previously visited Kenya and Ethiopia to raise awareness on child marriage, and over the past 6 months has been on a learning tour here in the U.S. with UN Women, meeting with activists and policymakers. But first, let's take a look at this short video.
I've wanted to be a UN Goodwill Ambassador since I was a little girl. And then when I had my son, within a week, I knew what I was supposed to do. Concepts about parenthood that had been abstract to me suddenly became very, very real. And I felt connected to the experience of so many people on the planet. Something that I'd like to devote myself to is improving parental leave in the US.
We want our kids to be healthy, to be thriving. What does a child need and what does the child want? The child wants their dad there too.
Right now, we're not showing that we really support the development of families.
You know, the fact that we're like one of 1 or 2 countries in the world that provide zero, you know, is appalling. That's a national disgrace.
So we've just come a very long way, I think, compared to many other societies, especially the US. And it's been a huge boost to our economy. It actually serves the society. Equality is good for society.
You and the mayor, you're the pioneers in America on this. Why is it so important to you that men and women be supported in the same way when it comes to parental leave?
If people are really any nation's greatest resource, then we should be doing everything we can. And what we're finding, and we've got approximately 20,000 employees who are eligible for this, that men and women are taking advantage of this opportunity equally.
So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the stage UN Women's Global Goodwill Ambassador, Miss Anne Hathaway.
Ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, I think the Prime Minister's speech really led us to Anne's job. The real job is that she is now going to be UN Women's Global Ambassador on paid parental leave, because we have gone all over looking for some of the solutions to address gender equality. It starts at home. The biggest difference we can make in the lives of our society is a dad who is at home and who is paid and supported by institutions and employers for her to do that. And we have found a voice and an advocate who is passionate about that subject. And the #1 Prime Minister in a country that is #1 on this issue has just said that's the way to go. So Anne, you're on a good thing. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those words. Wow. President of the General Assembly, United Nations, UN Deputy Secretary-General, Executive Director, UN Women, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. When I was a very young person, I began my career as an actress. Whenever my mother wasn't free to drive me into Manhattan for auditions, I would take the train from suburban New Jersey and meet my father, who would have left his desk at the law office where he worked, and we would meet under the upper platform arrival and departure sign in Penn Station. We would then get on the subway together, and when we surfaced, he would ask me, "Which way is north?" I wasn't very good at finding north in the beginning, but I auditioned a fair amount, and so my dad kept asking me, "Which way is north?" Over time, I got better at finding it. I was struck by that memory yesterday while boarding the plane to come here, not just by how far my life has come since then, but by how meaningful that seemingly small lesson has been. When I was still a child, my father developed my sense of direction And now, as an adult, I trust my ability to navigate space. My father helped give me the confidence to guide myself through the world. In late March last year, 2016, I became a parent for the first time. I remember the indescribable and, as I understand it, pretty universal experience of holding my week-old son and feeling my priorities change on a cellular level. I remember I experienced a shift in consciousness that gave me the ability to maintain my love of career and also cherish something else, someone else, so much, much more. Like so many parents, I wondered how I was going to balance my work with my new role as parent. And in that moment, I remember that the statistic for the US's policy on maternity leave flashed in my mind. American women are currently entitled to 12 weeks unpaid leave. American men are entitled to nothing. That information landed differently for me when 1 week after my son's birth, I could barely walk. That information landed differently when I was getting to know a human who was completely dependent on my husband and I for everything, when I was dependent on my husband for most things, and when we were relearning everything we thought we knew about our family and our relationship. It landed differently. Somehow, we and every American parent were expected to be back to normal in under 3 months. Without income? I remember thinking to myself, if the practical reality of pregnancy is another mouth to feed in your home, and America is a country where most people are living paycheck to paycheck, how does 12 weeks unpaid leave economically work? The truth is, for too many people, it doesn't. 1 in 4 American women go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth because they can't afford to take off any more time than that. That's 25% of American women. Equally disturbing, women who can afford to take a full 12 weeks often don't, because it'll mean incurring a motherhood penalty, meaning they will be perceived as less dedicated to their job and will be passed over for promotions and other career advancement. In my own household, my mother had to choose between a career and raising 3 children, a choice that left her unpaid and underappreciated as a homemaker, because there just wasn't support for both paths. The memory of being in the city with my dad is a particularly meaningful one, since he was the sole breadwinner in our house, and my brothers and my time with him was always limited by how much he had to work. And we were an incredibly privileged family. Our hardships were the stuff of other families' dreams. The deeper into the issue of paid parental leave I go, the clearer I see the connection between persisting barriers to women's full equality and empowerment and the need to redefine and in some cases destigmatize men's roles as caregivers. In other words, thank you. In other words, in order to liberate women, we need to liberate men. The assumption and common practice that women and girls look after the home and the family is a stubborn and very real stereotype that not only discriminates against women, but limits men's participation and connection within the family and society. These limitations have broad-ranging and significant effects for them and for the children. We know this. So why do we continue to undervalue fathers and overburden mothers? Paid parental leave is not about taking days off work. It's about creating the freedom to define roles, to choose how to invest time, and to establish new, positive cycles of behavior. Companies that have offered paid parental leave for employees have reported improved employee retention, reduced absenteeism and training costs, and boosted productivity and morale. Far from not being able to afford to have paid parental leave, it seems we can't afford not to. In fact, a study in Sweden showed that for every month fathers took paternity leave, the mother's income increased by 6.7%. That's 6.7% more economic freedom for the whole family. Data from the International Men and Gender Equality Survey shows that most fathers report that they would work less if it meant that they could spend more time with their children. And picking up on the thread that the Prime Minister mentioned, I'd like to ask, how many of us here today saw our dads enough growing up? How many of you dads here see your kids enough now? We need to help each other if we are going to grow. Along with UN Women, I am issuing a call to action for countries, companies, and institutions globally to step up and become champions for paid parental leave. In 2013, provisions for paid parental leave were in only 66 countries out of 190 UN member states. I look forward to beginning with the UN itself, which has not yet achieved parity, and whose paid parental leave policies are currently up for review. Oh, you're going to see a lot of me. Let us lead by example in creating a world in which women and men are not economically punished for wanting to be parents. I don't mean to imply that you need to have children to care about and benefit from this issue. Whether or not you have or want kids, you will benefit by living in a more evolved world with policies not based on gender. We all benefit from living in a more compassionate time where our needs do not make us weak. They make us fully human. Maternity leave or any workplace policy based on gender can, at this moment in history, only ever be a gilded cage. Though it was created to make life easier for women, we now know it creates a perception of women as being inconvenient to the workplace. We now know it chains men to an emotionally limited path, and it cannot, by definition, serve the reality of a world in which there is more than one type of family. Because in the modern world, some families have two daddies. How exactly does maternity leave serve them? Today, on International Women's Day, I would like to thank all of those who went before in creating our current policies. Let us honor them and build upon what they started by shifting our language and therefore our consciousness away from gender and towards opportunity. Let us honor our own parents' sacrifice by creating a path for a more fair, farther-reaching truth to define all of our lives, especially the lives of our children. Because paid parental leave does more than give more time for parents to spend with their kids. It changes the story of what children observe and will from themselves imagine possible. I see cause for hope. In my own country, the United States, currently the only high-income country in the world without paid maternity, let alone parental leave, great work has begun in the states of New York, California, New Jersey, Rhode Island, and Washington, which are currently all implementing paid parental leave programs. First Lady Chirlane McCray and Mayor Bill de Blasio have granted paid parental leave to over 20,000 government employees in New York City. We can do this. Bringing about change cannot just be the responsibility of those who need it most. We must have the support of those in the highest levels of power if we are ever to achieve parity. That is why it's such an honor to recognize and congratulate pioneers of paid parental leave like the global company Danone. Today, I am proud to announce Danone Global CEO Emmanuel Faber as our inaugural He for She thematic champion for paid parental leave. As part of this announcement, Danone will implement a global 18 weeks gender-neutral, paid parental leave policy for the company's 100,000 employees by the year 2020. Monsieur Faber, when Ambassador Emma Watson delivered her now iconic He for She speech and stated that if we live in a world where men occupy a majority of positions of power, we need men to believe in the necessity of change, I believe she was speaking about visionaries like you. Merci. Imagine what the world could look like 1 generation from now if a policy like Danone's becomes the new standard. If 100,000 people become 100 million, 1 billion, more. Every generation must find their north. When women around the world demanded the right to vote, we took a fundamental step towards equality. North. When same-sex marriage was passed in the US, we put an end to a discriminatory law. North. When millions of men and boys and prime ministers and deputy directors of the UN, sorry, the president of the General Assembly, that's what happens when I go off script. When men, like the men in this room and around the world, the ones we cannot see, the ones who support us in ways we cannot know but we feel, when they answered Emma Watson's call to be he for she, the world grew. North. We must ask ourselves, how will we be more tomorrow than we are today? The whole world grows when people like you and me take a stand because we know that beyond the idea of how men and women are different, there is a deeper truth, that love is love and parents are parents. Thank you.
Miss Anne Hathaway, thank you for your passion, your commitment to the UN. And I know a few people are leaving. I do want to thank the PGA and DSG for gracing us with your presence today. Thank you so much. We are now going to move towards a panel discussion, and joining us for that. So for, again, those of you who have to leave, please exit. But as all the switches happen right now, I'm just going to introduce the few people who will be attending this panel discussion. His Excellency, Mr. Antonio de Aguiar Patriote, Chair of the 61st Session of the Commission on the Status of Women. Also, Her Excellency, Ms. Lana Nusaibe, President of UN Women Executive Board, and Kassar Jacobson, who's a disability activist and youth champion. And Phumzile, I'm going to actually ask you to open up this discussion with a few remarks. No?
Thank you very much. I'm allowing people to settle and Martha to come and join us.
Martha hasn't arrived. I don't know where she is. We don't know where to find her. I can't see my name.
Where is
The names are the same. Those of you left, disability, Lana, yourself, and Patriot. The disability? She's right here. She's on the side.
you are? Thank you.
Zile?
Thank you very much to all of you for this start. It's been a moving morning so far. I am hoping that, like me, I feel we are making the shift of a generation from maternity leave to parental leave and creating the space for fathers to play their role and to ensure that the burden of care that right now rests in the heaviest way on the shoulders of women and girls gets redistributed, gets recognized, and gets reduced for women and girls. This is the journey that we are starting, and it is in line with the CSW theme for this year. It is also in line with the International Women's Day theme, which is the theme of women and work, because work at this point doesn't work for women. We are starting a journey to make work work for women. And I thank the panelists that you're going to hear from, and I give it back to Shadi.
Thank you. You know, over the next 2 weeks, dozens of ministers and thousands of government delegates will gather here in New York to agree on the key strategies and actions for women's economic empowerment in the changing world of work. And this is a very big opportunity. This is in particular, I guess, for the 2030 Agenda, which is going to set important targets for gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls, but also for full productive employment and decent work, for poverty eradication, and for tackling inequalities, just to name a few. Government delegates will be joined by thousands of representatives from civil society. So with that said, I'd like to pose this first question to His Excellency, Mr. Antonio Guterres Patriote. In regards to key issues, what do you think are your expectations for the Commission that they should address?
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you for the opportunity to address this audience today in the presence of the Executive Director of UN Women and after hearing some very inspiring opening remarks. Let me say that in my capacity as chair of the 61st session of the Commission on the Status of Women, I will be extremely engaged this year again in considering our priority theme, which is women's economic empowerment in the changing world of work. Now, this will not be the entire agenda because we will also be evaluating progress in the implementation of the agreed conclusions of 2014 that dealt with the achievements under the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. We will also look at a new focus area, which is the empowerment of indigenous women. And of course, we will not neglect other items on the agenda, including progress or lack thereof in combating violence against women, looking at multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. But this year's priority theme, I would say, is actually critical and strategic. According to the Global Gender Gap Report published in 2016 by the World Economic Forum, which the PGA alluded to, gender pay gaps persist in all countries, and that includes Iceland, actually, which is #1, and we congratulate Iceland. But if there's one thing one realizes when working with gender equality, is that no one has yet reached parity and equality of opportunity. On average, women earn 23% less than men. Translated into an 8-hour workday, this essentially means that after 6 hours and 10 minutes, women work for free. So on March 14, during CSW ministerial segment, the Commission will suspend its work at 4:10 p.m. to draw attention to the circumstance that reflects the persisting inequalities. Through the brief symbolic end to Women's Work Day, the Commission will show solidarity with all women who are paid less than men for work of equal value. Now, in many countries, unaffordable care services, the lack of provisions for parental paid leave, we just heard a compelling intervention by Anne Hathaway that points to the fact that even in highly developed countries, you lack obligatory regulations to ensure this. The absence of financial support to families with children, all of these adversely affect the female labor force. Now, we know that governments must do more to improve the regulatory frameworks for equality. But I would say that a high level of responsibility falls on the private sector because inequality is particularly to be observed in the private sector. Mostly in the public sector, for example, the gender pay gap either does not exist or is relatively reduced. So as we gather again this year at CSW 61, I think we will have the opportunity to tap into the extraordinary participation by government, civil society, other stakeholders to push ahead with our agenda and ensure that we make progress on this most pressing of items, which is the economic empowerment. And the PGA was saying that according to some estimates, we would need to wait for 150 years for gender parity to exist, but that's assuming that there won't be any pushback. And we are also confronting resistance in a number of areas and societies and situations. So we must not only work very hard, but try to accelerate the pace and prevent pushback from happening. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And as we heard earlier, us women, we're very impatient, so that is far too long. You know, I just wanted to pose a second question to you. You are chairing this session of the Commission, I believe, for a second year now. Can you tell us how you see the contributions of this Commission to the goals that we are celebrating on International Women's Day?
Well, very gladly. First of all, my chairmanship coincided last year with the first session of the CSW that took place after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda and the adoption at the highest political level of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, with a standalone goals for women's equality, but also recognized importance of an implementation of the entire agenda through gender responsive policies, because whether you look at education, health, inequality, eradicating poverty, you will not reach your goals unless you look at the gender situation. And one aspect in which I find that CSW is uniquely positioned to make a contribution is not only the high level of participation, being the commission that attracts the most participation by civil society and other stakeholders, but also because CSW already operates in universal mode. Now, we know that one of the biggest challenges in shifting from the MDG agenda, which was applicable only to developing countries, to the SDG agenda, which is of universal applicability, is to find the structures in the UN system that can handle this challenge universally. CSW already does this. We're already working with the most developed countries, with the least developed countries, sharing experiences, learning that sometimes the answer comes from the north, as Anne Hathaway was saying, but sometimes it also comes from the south. And if I can be allowed to say one or two words about my own country, I am particularly proud to participate in this endeavor. Brazil, having been the country that introduced gender equality into the Charter of the United Nations back in the San Francisco Conference, played a key role in the creation of CSW, played a key role through Rio+20 in setting out the document, The Future We Want, which ultimately translated into the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. So the beauty of CSW is this. We gather around common objectives through a universal endeavor that tries to tackle one of the key elements in ensuring that our societies will be more prosperous, equitable, just, and stable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Phumzile. Phumzile, how important are the SDGs for achieving gender equality and achieving women's economic empowerment by 2030? And what kind of partners do you feel that you need at this point?
Thank you very much, Shadi. One of the important and benefits of the SDGs is the fact that they are universal. We've just heard from the country that is at the top of the index saying that they also still have problems. If the SDGs were not universal, Iceland would not have to do anything about their situation. But under these goals, they also have to deliver, just like other countries that are at further down in the index. Some of the universal challenges which are addressed by the SDGs, which we learn from each other when we implement, will include gender parity, because there are countries that are making greater efforts than others. So we're able to learn from the lessons of those countries. Countries that are already doing something about parental leave, we now have evidence, we know what difference this makes. Countries that are also involved in addressing and ensuring that reproductive rights, sexual rights, and health are respected and there's access to service, we know what happens in those countries. And all of these issues are addressed in the SDGs. Other important thing about SDGs is the fact that not only do you have one goal that drills down into the issues of gender equality and addresses the issues that can give us systemic change, change that lasts, change that will make sure that we're not sitting here 30 years later and we're discussing the same things, I pray. But it also covers, gender is also covered in all the other goals. So you have both a horizontal and a vertical possibility to address gender. And if we all work together on the issues that we think will move the needle furthest, the issues that when we jump together on, will create an earthquake and will make sure that that pillar on which that discriminatory activity around women crumbles, we can then reach the scale that we need to reach so that we can really see change that is global, that is deep, and SDGs do offer us that opportunity. And on the partnerships, the agenda for women is very complex. It arises everywhere. There isn't an area where you can walk into and there's nothing to say about women. What therefore we need in the SDGs are partners from all walks of life. And those partners are in the private sector, in the public sector, the women as the core, governments, young people, media, etc. And as you saw when the SDGs were negotiated, all of these partners were part of the process. They need to be part of the journey as we continue with the journey now. It's 13 years, by the way, people, before 2013, so clock is ticking. 13.
Okay, all right, thank you, Phumzile. Yes, so looking for solutions, north, south, east, or west, whatever it takes. And next, I'd like to have Her Excellency, Ms. Lana Nusbayev, President of UN Women Executive Board, chime in a little bit. You know, the UN Women Executive Board is responsible for providing policy guidance and governing the operational activities of UN Women and ensuring that this entity is responsive to the needs and priorities of recipient countries. So my question to you, as President of the 41-country Executive Board of UN Women, how do you see your role in shaping the working methods and strategy of the board to reflect basically the changing world of work for its members and for the future of UN Women itself?
Thank you very much for having me here today, and I'd like to take this moment to also salute Phumzile for the work she has done for UN Women, the key agency that is mandated to take the gender equality goals global. For the UAE, this is a very personal journey because for us, gender empowerment and gender equality is a fundamental principle as both a foreign policy priority, a domestic priority, and as you've heard today, because the economic numbers make sense. I think that's why that role is reflected in taking on this role as President of the Executive Board, where I facilitate the dialogue amongst member states, not only the 41 member states, but the regions that they represent, in terms of supporting, enforcing, and facilitating the essential work that UN Women does, both here in headquarters, but also around the world. And I think that is key. We've heard a number of data points today. We've heard that it would take over 100 years at our current rate to close the gender empowerment gap in the workforce. In the UAE, the same data from the World Economic Forum shows that we are #1 in the region in terms of the highest gender empowerment, literacy, and participation of women in the workforce. So I fully endorse Ambassador Patriotti's point that there are lessons from the north and there are lessons from the south. Today is not simply a celebration. I think we heard that very clearly from Anne Hathaway, the new Goodwill Ambassador. Today is a call to step up for action, not just women, it's also the men. And I think looking across the room, seeing how many men are here today, it's clear the echo chamber has expanded. We are now all talking to each other as an integrated society because we each represent 50% of our population. And we know economically that we could add $12 trillion to our economy by 2025 if we simply closed the gap at the workforce in terms of gender. So the numbers show that to be true. What do we do for the executive board? I'm going to hold up a chart that I have just seen for the first time this morning and that I think is worth looking at. This shows, this tiny little circle here is the funding that UN Women gets for this really important mandate. All these other circles represent all the other agencies. Now, all of them do critical work. Right in the center is DPKO, the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. Let me tell you something that, again, is supported by the data. When women are not at the peace table negotiating the peace agreement is likely to fail within 5 years. When women are at the table negotiating the peace, that number goes up to a likelihood of lasting 15 years or more by 35%. Given the global crises, given the global protracted crises we are facing today, upwards of 65 million people displaced, in our region alone, more than 50% under the age of 25, and the youth challenges along with the gender challenges that pose, because we know that in times of conflict, the most vulnerable, the most affected are women and children. We can't simply sit here and pay lip service to these global goals and to global goal number 5 for gender empowerment. We have to support the mandate. We have to support the agency and the people who have been tasked to do this. In my role as president of the executive board, we're not only going to be sitting and facilitating this dialogue in New York, but with the executive presidents of other boards, we will be making field visits to Nepal and hopefully to India to see operations on the ground, and specifically UN Women operations on the ground, and to understand how we impact from New York globally. How do we project outwards? I think what we heard here today is that over 100 years is simply too long. It doesn't make economic sense, and it doesn't make sense for our holistic view of the world, for the peace and security we are trying to achieve in a really, really difficult time. So we support the new Secretary-General's agenda. He is firmly committed to this principle, both in his cabinet. But as we've all said, the UN has to look like the world we wish it to be, not the world that it is with all its imperfections. So he's committed to changing that 22% senior management figure that are only women. He is committed to changing that within the next 5 years of his mandate. And we support him and we salute him as the United Arab Emirates, because it's the smart thing to do and it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Very nice. You know, I'd just like to follow up with you. As president of the executive board, you are the second woman to actually hold this position and the first representative from the Gulf Cooperation Council. Can you tell us a little bit about your past experiences and what has influenced your leadership on the board?
Thank you. Well, I think my past experience is very much a reflection of the country I come from, my country, the United Arab Emirates. And I think growing up in that environment has enabled me to take on this role and to feel supported by both the men and the women in my life. And that starts at a leadership level from the top. So it starts both with the founder of our country, His Highness Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, and the First Lady of our country, Her Highness Sheikh Fatima bint Mubarak, and their national strategy for empowering women in the country. When the UAE was formed in 1971, there were only 40 university graduates in the country. Today, over 70% of our university graduates are women, STEM graduates, so science and technology, education, math. Our women are in the judiciary, the police, the military, and of course a third of our cabinet. In fact, our Prime Minister just announced that within the next 5 years, he wants to see 50% of his cabinet ministers as women. So I'm very much a product of my country, and I'm very much a product also of my home, where my father took a very active, supportive role in helping me achieve my goals, whether it was at the age of 8 when I told him I wanted to try out for the boys' football team, and he mustn't stop me, because there simply wasn't a girls' football team at my school. And going on into my career, I think, as Anne mentioned, the support of the father figure in the home is incredibly important, and I pay tribute every day to mine, who continues to support me in my career. I think also in terms of being from a region, the Gulf Cooperation Council are really trying to set a new benchmark from a South-South cooperation model, from a development model for how we can do this, and provide humbly our experience to the world about why this model works for us, why it has empowered us, why it has created a stable, secure, and prosperous society. So the global pay debate we've just been listening to, thankfully in my country, doesn't exist, because we've enshrined equal pay for work in our law. There's a very simple way of doing this. You legislate it and you make it your law. We've enshrined women's representation on boards in our law. We have a gender balance council dedicated to achieving this, and Fumzila has been a frequent visitor to our country, and she's seen the implementation of these policies on the ground. So I very much salute my country, my background, and the support I have had from both leadership but also from the grassroots in our country, where we are told that there simply is no difference between what men and women can do. Paid maternity leave is 3 months in our country, and we continue still today to have the debate, is it enough, what should we be doing next? When I had my son, I was allowed to take advantage of a 2-hour daily breastfeeding law. I was allowed to go home and feed my son any 2 hours of the day I wanted, fully supported. I worked at the minister's office at the time, fully supported by him, to take that time to also continue, after paid maternity leave, to continue to give my son the nourishment and the love and the affection and the care that he needed. And so I salute what Anne said about the role of parenting and about the role of recognizing what men have to do in that setup, that it's a combined effort. It takes a community, a village, a country to raise a child, and we should all be raising the men and women who will make us proud in that endeavor.
Thank you. Well, we salute you for all of the work you've done. And next, I'd like to bring in Kassar Jacobson, who is an activist pushing ahead in terms of disabilities and changing the world of work. Kassar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your priorities and what you've tried to do? And a little bit about your backstory.
Sure. Well, I'm humbled to speak here today on International Women's Day. It's exciting. My background is actually in science. But as we sit here and talk about artificial intelligence today, I wish I would have taken a different role. We discuss the changing world of work and women with disabilities, and it's funny here because I have the sign language interpretation behind me, and I didn't realize how to turn it on until afterwards in front of me, so I'm doing some of this. But had I known then what I know now, I either would have pushed for a different path or I would have chosen a different field within science. But if we continue to push for innovation, we allow for more opportunities to choose fields, not despite of being deaf, but simply because of having an impairment or disability like being deaf or hard of hearing. And it's irrelevant to the path that we choose. So, it's often the case that other factors such as societal, physical, attitudinal barriers are more determinant in opportunities we have and path and choose. Then having a disability, women and girls with disabilities have fewer opportunities than other women or girls or men and boys with disabilities. So the rapid transformation driven by technology presents new opportunities and challenges. The digital divide experienced by people with disability and wider for women. Many women with disabilities continue to be digitally excluded because of the lack of awareness, support, access, cost of equipment. Today, more than ever, before we are seeing technology integrated into the world of work, yes, hearing innovation would have helped me while I was pursuing my education, but because of the education system was not always set up to provide access for the hard of hearing or the deaf, if it was, you didn't always receive the same education with the options available. Now, for many, this is different. There are deaf surgeons, blind lawyers, but we need to make sure that we are not blind or deaf to the needs of the differently abled communities as technology changes.
Kassar, thank you for lending your voice today. Thank you. And we're going to wrap up this first panel discussion. Phumzile, would you like to give closing remarks?
Well, so that I don't take more time, really, it's to say thank you to this panel and the presentations that we had before, including thanking the Secretary-General in his absence for the message that came through the video. Were you not impressed about how snazzy the video was? Really engaging and the message very strong and very sharp, but also for the actions that he has already started, which would ensure that as the UN, when we go out to call for other institutions to tackle the issue of gender parity, we are actually going through the same journey ourselves. We are busy with that work here. He has also begun to tackle the issue of sexual exploitation and abuse that is associated with our peacekeeping work. So it's not all talk, it is actually action, and I'm sure we're going to be able to see results. I also want to thank the UN Women team and everybody who has made it possible that you are here, ready as you are today, and dedicated
not only to celebrate this day, but also to discuss the problems that we will be hearing a lot about in the next coming days during the CSW. This month of March really has become an important assembly point for all of us to reflect every year about how far we've come, but how far more we still need to come. It is the biggest intergovernmental forum in the world that discusses gender issues. So thank you so much for supporting us in this manner, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you all, thank you all. And we are going to end this one panel discussion and begin another, but Jana was just so fantastic. We've got to bring her back here to sing another song.
She's just a girl and she's on fire, hotter than a fantasy, lonely like a highway. She's living in a world and it's on fire, feeling like a catastrophe, but she knows she can fly away. Oh, she's got her feet on the ground and she's burning it down. Oh, got her head in the clouds and she's not backing down. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She's walking on fire. This girl is on fire. Oh yeah. Looks like a girl, but she's a flame. So bright she could burn your eyes. Better look the other way. You can try, but you'll never forget her name. She's on top of the world, hottest of the hottest girls. Say, oh, we got our feet on the ground and we're burning it down. Oh, got our head in the clouds and we're not coming down. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. She's walking on fire. This girl is on fire. Oh, everybody stares as she goes by, 'cause they can see the flame that's in her eyes. Watch her as she's lighting up the night. Nobody knows that she's a lonely girl, and it's a lonely world. But she gon' let it burn, baby, burn, baby. This girl is on fire. This girl is on fire. Oh, she's just a girl and she's on fire.
Jana, that was fantastic. And I'd like to thank her mom and her sister who are also here. You guys have got to be so proud. Fantastic. And we're going to hear more from Jana. Actually, at the end, there's a big finale with some other Broadway stars. So please stick around for that. It's a real treat. We're going to move on to our next panel discussion. Without partnerships between representatives of the private sector, informal sector, and men, no goal left alone, one as lofty as the economic empowerment of women can be achieved. We are honored to have with us for our second panel representatives from the private sector and civil society who represent a range of voices in this significant conversation, voices of innovators, low-wage and informal workers and men. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Alexandria Walden, Public Policy and Government Relations Counsel with Google. We have Nicole Isaac, who is Head of U.S. Public Policy with LinkedIn. Ms. Anita Roth, with the Global Head of Policy Research at Airbnb. Dr. Martha Chen, a professor at Harvard University. And Mr. Quentin Walcott, Co-Executive Director of Connect. And of course, Bumzili is here with us once again. So as everyone makes their way to the seat, thank you all for coming here today. Thank you. Thank you. And first, I actually like to start with Ms. Alexandria Walden with Google. You know, the nature of work is changing for everyone, as we know, men and women and those inside the traditional labor force and those outside. The effects of the changing world of work are widespread, but what implications does this changing world of work and workforce have specifically for our collective quest for gender equality?
I just wanted to start by saying thank you for including Google as part of this conversation today. Thank you to UN for your leadership on these issues. It's an honor to be here. Google aspires to be an organization that reflects the global diversity of our audience, and we believe that that informs and makes our products better, our products and services better. So we, in particular, celebrate the contributions of women to technology, and we want to show that women can contribute to the science and technology and grow their careers and dreams at Google and in our sector. And we also seek to make sure that our products serve the needs of all of our users, and especially women. So to your question, access to information can change everything. We know that because we're Google, and search is a major part of what we do as a business. We know that access to information is especially important for marginalized groups like women and women who have been barred historically from power structures aimed at maintaining the status quo. YouTube, for example, is a space that is meant to promote freedom of expression. It is meant to bolster sharing and understanding and change. It is also a space where we see that YouTubers can provide a space to make money. There are women like Lily Singh, who is a YouTube star, and she recently released a documentary about her experience rising to fame through her YouTube career. And there are also women like Jenny Doan from Missouri, who's a quilt maker. She owned a small business in Missouri making quilts, and began to grow a following by doing training sessions on YouTube, and she's since grown her business to be one of the largest quilt making companies in the country, selling her quilts around the world. So our product YouTube is one of the ways in which women as entrepreneurs can reach global audiences. In other spaces, we have scholarships and we invest in research and learning around women in STEM, and try to identify ways in which we can fill the gaps where women are seeing barriers in the space.
And I'd like to follow with you. How do you think that we can expand opportunities for women in the modern world of work?
So, we know that that gender inequality persists around the world and in every sector, but we also know that the tech sector has some specific challenges that we've spent a lot of time thinking about, and we have a lot of commitment and investment in trying to address. One of the major focuses for us in terms of thinking about how we can help our own sector do better and then help other sectors do better as well, is looking at some investments that we've made with the Gina Davis Institute and their partnership with USC around looking at women in entertainment. We worked with USC to develop software that could accurately detect how much we see and hear women in the media. And we found that we see and hear men 2 times as much as we hear women. And that has an impact and really reflects kind of our global culture, and I think gets at a lot of the things that have been spoken about this morning on previous panels. So from that, we invested in surveys, and we learned that when filmmakers heard that data, many of them were actually interested in and did in fact change their behavior and changed the way that they developed characters and had women on the screen. So that just goes to the point that data and innovation can change behavior. And so we're invested in making sure that this is just the beginning of doing that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And now I'd like to bring in Ms. Nicole Isaac, Head of U.S. Public Policy at LinkedIn, into the conversation. You know, LinkedIn operates the world's largest professional network with more than 467 million professionals from around the world. It links opportunities to people, especially important in the gig economy, where many more will be independent contractors than permanent employees working out of brick and mortar hubs and institutions. And it, of course, is a platform for connecting people in the unique positions of being able to analyze data in mass scale. So can you tell us some of the kind of trends that you've been able to discern from all of the data that's out there?
Absolutely. Thank you. Mr. Prime Minister, Madam Deputy Secretary-General, Madam Executive Director, thank you, and it's an honor for LinkedIn to be here. LinkedIn's vision is to create economic opportunity for every individual of the global workforce. And we're doing that each and every day in so many ways. As the moderator outlined, we have over 467 individual members on LinkedIn around the world. We have 7 million companies on the platform that are using LinkedIn to identify talent, recruit talent, and ensure that individuals are filling their workforce in a sustainable way. We have over 30,000 institutions of higher education on LinkedIn as well. And right now, the platform skews a little bit more professional, but we estimate that the global workforce is closer to 3 billion individuals, and our goal is to get there. So with 467 million today and 3 billion to go, our due north is exactly that. And it includes women, middle-skill workers, frontline workers. The projects and pilots that we're doing all across the United States and around the world with governments, with multilaterals, with organizations like the UN are designed to help us get there. So what exactly does all that information tell us about women on LinkedIn? We just released research noting that of all of the positions in leadership, women are only filling 25% of positions worldwide in leadership. We also know that the countries which have the highest representation of women as leaders are the United States, France, Canada, and India, with India making one of the greatest strides in the last year alone. Women are represented in sectors across all industries and all parts of our workforce, which includes nonprofits, education, healthcare, and of course, information technology. We've seen an 18% increase for women in leadership across tech in the last year, and over 56% increase since 2008. But all of that being said, we have a ways to go. Women only make up 18% of all CEOs worldwide. And so as Ms. Hathaway noted, our due north has to be everything and getting women at the table at every level. We also know that of their male counterparts, the only roles that women are outpacing their male counterparts in tend to be chief human resource officers. And that is still somewhat disconcerting. We have to ensure that women are at the table at every level of the C-suite, and it's critical that we continue to work with employers, policymakers, and institutions at every level to help make this happen and to make this a reality.
Wonderful. You know, you touched upon how skills gap plays an important role in democratizing opportunity for for both women in the disrupted world and women outside the disrupted world. Can you elaborate more on that and also talk about how we can expand opportunity for those women?
Thank you again. You know, today we actually released the workforce reports across the U.S., and our goal is to release more than 10 cities in the skills gaps across 10 cities, but to do it around the world, and we'll get there. We have over 157 countries on LinkedIn represented, and we have representation from most of the cities. So when I talk about the 7 million companies that are on LinkedIn, we're able to see who's hiring, what skill sets they're hiring for, what skill sets they used to hire for. So i.e., when Google hired 1,000 individuals in San Francisco in the past year, but in the past 5 years may have hired individuals with a different skill set. And we can tell you what those skill sets are. Of the 30,000 institutions of higher education, when we talk about their representation on LinkedIn, we can not only see who the employers are and what they're hiring for, but we can see who the educators are and what they're training for. We can tell you that at any given time in Manchester, that the University of Manchester may be educating for a particular skill set that employers are not ready to hire for. We can tell you that in the University of Toronto, when we partnered with the City of Toronto, which has a relatively high percentage of youth unemployment, we could tell you that employers were hiring for a skill set that unfortunately Seneca College wasn't training for. So our goal is to work with policymakers and governments around the world to ensure that they have visibility into all levels of their workforce. And what does it mean for women? This work ensures that we are providing information for women so that they can make informed decisions into the training programs needed for those skills that are most in demand. Should they be going to Polytechnic Career College? Should they be going to MIT for a particular skill set if they want that job at NASA? We can tell you today where they should be going and why they should be going there to end up in the job of their choice. Moreover, our goal is to ensure that employers are making a more informed decision into their workforce. And they do this with the right investments in their workforce. When they know that a particular supply side of the economy is actually prevalent in one local community as opposed to another. And we know with providing visibility and transparency into the options that exist for every individual at every level, that we'll collectively get there. And finally, I think with respect to women and work, it's just ever more critical that we work together, that we have more partnerships like the ones that we're doing in Singapore or Manchester or Stockholm or in Philadelphia, where we're identifying the skills that are most in demand to train the workforce for the jobs of the future and not just for the jobs of today. Thank you.
Thank you. A lot of insights about LinkedIn. Didn't realize so much. Well, next I'd like to pose a question to Ms. Anita Roth, who is the Global Head of Policy Research at Airbnb. And for those of you who don't know, Airbnb is an online platform that allows people to offer their home or room in their home to visiting guests for a particular fee. So women earning a total of $10 billion through home sharing represents a significant financial opportunity, no doubt. But what implications does this expanded economic opportunity have for women, particularly women in developing countries?
Yeah, I'd like to echo my thanks for welcoming Airbnb to participate today. It's a pleasure to be here. As you mentioned, over the past 8-9 years since Airbnb has been around, women on Airbnb, women hosts, have earned over $10 billion. We know from data that we look at in a study that we released just earlier this week that 55% of all of our hosts around the world are women. So women are disproportionately participating in Airbnb and earning a relatively significant amount of money through their participation. We also know that women hosts on Airbnb are much more likely to be what we call super hosts, which are hosts that sort of go above and beyond and provide some of the best experiences to guests traveling around the world. So we see this level of participation and the money that women are earning. And at the same time, we look around the world and see the wage gap that's been talked about, not just in the US, but in all sorts of countries around the world. And we like to look at how Airbnb, while certainly not the answer to the wage gap, but can help support women who are dealing with this in their day-to-day lives. Of the wage gap around the world, we see that roughly 20%, that women earn the equivalent of 20% of the wage gap. So by hosting on Airbnb, they're able to make up roughly 20% of the wage gap in various countries around the world. In the US, that amount is closer to 60%. So female hosts on Airbnb in the US earn roughly 60% of the difference in wage gap. Those kinds of numbers are promising, and for us, there's sort of a first step in figuring out where else opportunities for Airbnb lie to continue to support women as they host and continue to support women in their larger lives. At the same time, we've seen in research that in places like India and Kenya, women are earning the equivalent of a third of the annual household expenditures in those countries through Airbnb. So by being active participants in Airbnb and participating in essentially a global community, women have a little bit more flexibility in where they can find some additional supplemental income to help start to make up some of the differences in the wage gap.
You know, the labor market, as we've been talking about, is changing dramatically, particularly with automation, and women are increasingly at risk of losing their jobs to automation. What implications does the changing world of work and workforce have for women?
Absolutely. At Airbnb, we've done a number of surveys in the past couple years, most recently this year, where we saw that roughly 10% of our women hosts, particularly in places like China, Japan, and India, are entrepreneurs. When we look at the larger world of women and entrepreneurs and the kinds of job opportunities that are available to women every day, the idea of being in charge of your employment and sort of starting something new for yourself is an incredibly attractive one. At the same time, you know, we've seen through other research done by organizations that access to capital is a serious issue for female entrepreneurs and business owners. And by being able to link these two things together and identify ways for women, like hosting on Airbnb, that they can earn additional money to help support some of their entrepreneurial projects, we've seen enormous growth in women being able to start new businesses through the income that they're earning on Airbnb. In surveys that we've done, we estimate that roughly 50,000 female hosts on Airbnb have used the income that they earn to support new business ventures and new entrepreneurial enterprises. So these kinds of stats are very promising for us. They're exciting, and I think they point to new ways that we can start to support women, not just in the traditional labor force, but as the labor force changes and as economic opportunities change, helping them to identify new places that they can sort of explore their economic potential. At the same time, through the research that we've done, we've started to identify new opportunities to support partnerships that continue, again, to encourage women in new forms of economic employment. We support we're partnered with an organization in India, the Self-Employed Women's Association, SIWA, in training up women in India to understand what Airbnb hosting is, teaching them the business skills they need to participate in hosting, and providing new streams of economic income that help them support their livelihood. So those are the kinds of programs that are incredibly exciting for us. Again, they're first steps, and we're excited to continue to expand on them, but I think there shows a lot of promise for the different ways in which private sector can start to partner sort of beyond its own walls to help empower women and help make sure that women have equal access to employment and to capital and to wages that everyone else does.
Okay, thank you. First steps that are helping women make up that 20% pay gap. So absolutely. Very needed. Thank you very much. Deserves a round of applause. And now I'd like to turn our attention to the screen. We have, we're going to see an award-winning video called Alem that is set in Ethiopia, and it's a part of a Her Story Challenge organized by one of the U.S. embassies. Let's take a look.
Oh, here we go. It's on the...
Alan, Harvey.
vero, mi sculasci più film quando pensare di io in film aso io la sua mistia che mi invece sculasci più again.
بس شنو كانوا كتار المسلمين
أنا أبي
علم جمرة جمرة
علم أبي
ዮናስ አለ
የስኮላርሺፕ ፊልም ነው።
ዛሬ ነው እንዴ ለካ?
የስልጅ ስኮላርሺፑን አገኘሁኝ እኮ እማዬ፣ ስኮላርሺፑን አገኘሁኝ።
That was great, a real depiction of what women are going through. So the boy's sitting while she's doing all of the work. You know, we've been talking about breaking through these traditional norms for women to find their rightful place. So, Phumzile, let's talk about the future work for Alem. What does this mean for her? How does she get into this equation?
I ask that we watch this. I need water.
Need some water, you know. As you're drinking your water there, you know, I guess for many women looking at this, certainly all of the women here, we all come from a different sort of life. But this is what the UN is about changing Alem's life.
Yeah.
How do we change her trajectory?
Yeah, this video always touches me because there's so many children like this. I think she's a clever girl. Is this a yes or a yes?
Yes.
The fact that she had herself organized, she was going to watch the show, prepare for the scholarship, and the norms and traditions in the house put her in a specific space where she could not do that. So this issue of gender stereotypes starting from the home is essential for us to reduce the girls that we're gonna leave behind, like Alem. The boys also need exposure, suppose need upbringing at home that would make sure that they treat the situation differently in the house. Mom was outside washing. There potentially is an issue of infrastructure in that community, access to water, probably access to energy because they were cooking from outside. There was a little stove outside. When governments don't invest in social infrastructure, Alem carries the heavy burden of the inadequacy of public policy. Why should that girl be responsible for underperforming governments or investment choices that are wrong for women and girls? And of course, dad maybe is at work because there is no parental leave. That is why Alem has to look after the baby. And the tradition dictates that he works very hard or he has not been socialized into understanding that it is his responsibility, that he's at home, so that the situation could be better. He should have been carrying the baby if mom was working, so that the 3 children could actually watch. So I think this captures everything that we talk about. It brings it home, and the reality is when there isn't public policy, when the stereotypes are wrong, when there isn't infrastructure, when the education system is not gender sensitive, we will continue to produce what the SDGs do not want us to produce. And this is in our hands, however, to change and to do something about. And for me, this clip just brings it all together. I hope it does for you too.
It does. Thank you. And Dr. Martha Chen, I'd like to bring you into this discussion. More than half of all women workers around the world are informally employed without legal or social protection. Many of them, especially in the developed countries, are from poor households and disadvantaged communities. Most of them use simple, traditional technologies in their work. What impacts or disrupts their work is not so much modern technology, but rather the policies of government if they are self-employed, and the hiring practice of their employers if they are wage employed. What forces are changing the world of work for women at the base of the economic pyramid?
Thank you, and thank you, Phumzile, for inviting me to be here. I represent a global action research policy network called We Go, and its purpose is to promote the economic advancement and empowerment of the working poor, especially women, but also some men, in the informal economy. And we know from the data now that over half of all women workers are in the informal economy. We know that in some countries, quite a few actually, it's over 70%. And in a few, the country I know best, India being one of them, it's over 90% of the female workforce is in this informal economy. And as the film clip and Phumzile's comments reflected, what we're dealing in this world, the modern technology is beginning to affect them, but what really drives their disempowerment is the entrenched attitudes and norms. And it's not just the social norms around gender. We're very concerned. Everyone who knows me, my bee in the bee in my bonnet is the entrenched attitudes in mainstream economics that the informal economy is somehow illegal, non-productive, a drag, right? Something that needs to be gotten away with. And yet we know that most of the informal economy is comprised of the working poor. So let me just share the perspective of 3 groups of informal women workers, but there are also men in these sectors, and what is affecting them. And these are home-based producers, street vendors, and waste pickers, all 3 urban examples for the most part. And the home-based workers are those who, from their own homes, and often in settlements like we saw in the short video clip, underserved settlements, and they produce goods for domestic markets and also for global supply chains. Everything from garments, we sort of know that, but they also produce airplane cushions and automobile parts. 80% of automobile parts in India are produced in homes. Street vendors. Street vendors are those who try to find a good location in the central business area or where there's a pedestrian flow of customers. And they sell goods and everything from fresh flowers and produce to a whole range of consumer durables at low prices in convenient locations. And the waste pickers. The waste pickers are those who collect, sort, reclaim, recycle, transport the waste that all of us dispose of. And by doing so, what they're able to reclaim does not end up in a landfill or an incinerator. So they are environmental agents par excellence. And yet, it is the city that decides, because of these entrenched mindsets, whether an informal settlement should be given some kind of tenure, de facto even, and whether they should get basic infrastructure services. And they also decide whether, let's get rid of this informal settlement and move everyone to the periphery of cities. For the home-based worker whose home is the workplace, having some secure tenure and getting the basic infrastructure services makes her home more productive. For the street vendor, that's the classic battle between cities and informal workers, because they're always trying to shift the street vendors away because they're somehow unseemly. And they always come back, and there's this everyday struggle with the local authorities taking bribes, confiscating goods, and evicting them. It's a constant battle, very hard for them to increase their stock, improve their display equipment if you always have to be on the road, on the run rather, from the police. And the waste pickers, what they want is access to waste. One waste picker told me, waste is to a waste picker what land is to a farmer. It is their means of livelihood. And they would like, as cooperatives or associations, to bid for solid waste management contracts by the city. So this is the struggle they're involved in. And of course, there are other dominant players in their sectors, and these players set the prices, they determine the terms of trade, and often these are quite unfavorable to these workers. So these are the kind of forces that we see affecting women workers, which is in addition to what they face as women, but what they face as informal workers.
And how do you feel that the women at the base of this economic pyramid are responding to all of these changes? And what do you think can be done to support them?
Well, thank you. The really good news is that women informal workers and men are organizing. And we now have around the world at the local, the national, the regional, the international level, we have organizations of domestic workers, home-based workers, street vendors, and waste pickers. And I should add that these organizations many of them are inspired by the Self-Employed Women's Association of India, which Anita referred to, and if I may say so, supported by the WeGo network that I represent. They are engaged in ongoing struggles and negotiations, and they are seeing victories. So let me just share a few. HomeNet Thailand has fought for a law to protect home-based workers. The National Association of Street Vendors in India, along with SEWA, fought for a national law to protect and regulate. They don't want just no regulation, they want regulation that allows them to operate. There are local associations of waste pickers in Brazil, in Colombia, in India, that have gotten contracts from the cities to be the ones to do the primary collection and sorting and reclaiming of waste. March 1, we celebrated International Waste Picker Day, and there were waste picker organizations around the world, including Paris, that were celebrating with marches and posters that really played up their role as environmental agents. Today, in Pakistan, it may now be too late, but they did in today, Pakistan, celebrated a new law for home-based workers that recognizes them as workers and entitles them to social protection from the state. And last week, the market porters the head porters who go around the markets of Accra, they had met with the presidential candidates in the recent election campaign, and they wanted a toll lifted. It was assumed they were self-employed and they should pay a daily toll to the city, and yet they earn nothing. They sleep at the market. They're migrant Muslim women from the north of Ghana, terrible conditions, and the idea that they had to pay a daily toll to the city. So the presidential candidates said they would lift the toll, and lo and behold, last week, the newly elected president was true to his promise, and the toll has been lifted. So there are victories through this work, and I just wanted to say that, you know, the WeGo network I represent, we support these activities, and we have come to truly understand that if we want to advance women's economic empowerment, if we want to advance gender equity, if we want to reduce poverty, it will depend on all of us, whether it's governments or the private sector or civil society or the media or celebrities, to recognize and value the informal workforce, or at least the working poor in the informal workforce, rather than stigmatizing them. And we endorse the two principles of the UN high-level panel, the two main principles of the UN high-level panel on women's economic empowerment. The first is leave no one behind, which in this context has been interpreted by the panel to mean to focus on working poor women at the base of the pyramid. And the second principle comes from the worker movement, which is nothing for us without us, which means that these organizations want a seat at the table. They want to be here today, and sometimes they are. And that's what's, I think, is the secret to all that we seek to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. And we need the men. We've been talking about that. So we need you in this panel discussion, Quentin Walcott. Can you tell us about your work to engage men for gender equality?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you. I'm honored and privileged to be here and celebrating International Women's Day. And I'm with an organization called Connect, and we do gender-based violence and domestic violence prevention work here in New York City. And we're not just limited to New York City, because as you know, this is probably one of the most international cities in the world. So what our work looks like from the very beginning, you know, most of our programs are for women and girls. But what we found out was that we weren't really progressing or moving north, as the theme of today has become, because rightfully so, women and girls need crisis services. They need, you know, all types of programs in terms of economic empowerment, of course, job readiness programs, skills development programs. But what we found was that women and girls were not able to keep their positions because of the trauma from interpersonal violence or domestic violence that really prohibited them from, one, they could get the job, but they could not keep the job or attain the jobs in those ways. So, but just moving back to our work at Connect, what we found was critical was to really kind of change the entry point into looking at domestic violence and intimate partner violence as not just an issue that women have to deal with. It was an issue that predominantly men and boys were causing. So for us, it made sense to, as a strategy, to help women become safe and be empowered in their relationships in their communities, was to really engage men and boys. So for us, that was a strategy for women's safety and health and wholeness and wellness. And then also to really transform the ideas and the behavior and attitudes that men and boys had towards women and girls. So for us, it was a twofold pronged strategy to do that. And then in our work, it's really a question of, you know, what we're talking a lot about today is gender roles, right? And these are gender roles that are typically defined by men and are steeped in patriarchy and misogyny. So a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of engaging men and boys is to really unpack the notions of manhood and masculinity and fatherhood and what these things mean in an effort to, one, transform these men and also to keep women and children safe. So that's what our work looks like in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. And can you tell us, I guess, just a few other ways that you think that men can help women be supportive in these gender roles?
Yeah, I think it's really, a lot of the struggle here in the United States and all over the world is about like civil rights and ultimately we found out it's really more about human rights. It's in the same ways in how we look at equality, in 50-50 by 2030. That's a beautiful, beautiful goal. And I think that's the first level. But a lot of our work is to really work with men so we can get to the point that it's 70-30, where it's, women are in positions of power and shared leadership in ways that we're not, and we're not seemingly emasculated by the fact that we're not the head of the household, we're not the breadwinner, that we can really live with being the 30 of the 70-30, right? So the ultimate goal is mutuality in the conversations, but to really challenge, the conversations that we have, the way we think, and how we do that is to, look at how can men become perpetrators of male violence, because that's how we look at intimate partner violence and other forms of violence throughout the world. Men are at the center of that, to want to transform that, and to really move from being the perpetrators or the ones who are committing harm in many different levels, but to really kind of move from being allies and activists in our work in communities and with other men reaching out to men, of course, but then, really allying with women in a real way and making sure that women and the most marginalized woman or girl is at the table from the very beginning. So it's not a conversation of how can we catch up. It's like how can we really work together in a real meaningful and intentional way.
Thank you, Quentin Walcott.
Thank you.
Well, now we'd like to close the session. And a round of applause for everyone. Phumzile, would you like to give closing remarks?
Well, again, to thank everybody who's here, the panel, the previous panels, the audience, and these brave soldiers like yourself who are staying through up to the end. Thank you so much for making this time. What we've tried to do today is to paint a journey and the complexity of the lives and the needs of women. We today heard about the role that a Hollywood star can play to address an issue that exists in our household. And hopefully, if we're able to use her voice to reach the people that Phumzile, who was an aspiring star but never got there, could not reach. She can reach the people I cannot reach, and hopefully help us to get the conversation much further than amongst ourselves. Because there's a danger that when we always speak to ourselves, we're always preaching to the choir. And what we're trying to do is to break away from the choir, because the choir has other tasks to do. We also today had a discussion and listened to the challenges of disabled women and girls, and the changes that are needed, the infrastructure that is required, the policies that are needed, so that they too can realize their dream and their rights can be respected. We heard about the changing world of work and as in what is happening in technology. We had these fantastic young women who represent some of the cleverest people that we have, also showing us what is happening in that sector and how we need to take advantage, but also, I'm sure, to also look at the challenges that come with the advancement of technology. We heard from Viego about what is happening to millions and millions of women, 90% of the working women in India. I always say, too big to fail. Absolutely too big to fail. And those women are standing up, speaking for themselves, but they need to be supported. And all of these conversations that we're having, including Quintin's highlight of issues of violence against women, all of these issues experienced by women in all our countries, and refreshing that the issue of violence against women is being addressed by a man. But not... In each of these issues, because we are here in an institution that is an intergovernmental institution, there is a role for local government, for national government, and for us as a multilateral body that deals with different governments, and the potential space for us to exchange experiences. I'm seeing one of my colleagues here who facilitates the sharing from SDGs, where countries come together and share their experiences. And each of these stories exist in most of our countries. And when countries come together, they are able to exchange their learnings and how they have taken this forward. And the Secretary-General, previous one, set up a high-level panel on women's economic empowerment. And all of these issues that we've discussed there have been discussed in that panel. They will be discussed in the CSW. And hopefully, as we go forward with implementing the SDGs, we would be better equipped to deal with these issues. We also will recognize that the rights of women are also at stake here. When we talk about women's world of work, we're talking about decent work, and we're talking about respect of the rights of women at the workplace and in society, especially in a context where there is an assault on women's rights, women's organization, and the space for people to organize. So there's opportunities, but there's challenges, and we need to navigate in every way that we can, and each one of us have a role to play. So thank you so much for being here, and hang in there for the next few weeks, 2 weeks, those who will be around, so that in the CSW we can continue the conversation. Happy Women's Day.
Thank you, Phumzile. Thank you. Well, now I'd like to open the floor to 2 statements from the audience, and we're going to begin with Ms. Caitlin Wilson, who is the Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Australia to the United Nations. Ms. Wilson.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the opportunity to speak briefly today. It's been such a great event, the combination of the panels, the introductions. It's both stimulating but challenging to us all. We've heard some really great ideas and opportunities for driving change, helping to disrupt the status quo and promoting gender equality and women's economic empowerment. And we have heard also that although there really is still a long way to come, and we've seen some of the statistics and the barriers, but equally, if we bring the full force of our energy and our will together, that we can overcome the multiple barriers that prevent women from reaching economic empowerment and other challenges. I think this and the previous panel also showed this needs women and men involved. This is not just about women pressing for more. So thank you very much, Quintin. It was terrific to hear from you. The industry perspective was brilliant. We know and we've seen the data. Women's participation in the workforce is good for business. Companies benefit from increasing leadership opportunities for women, which increases an organisation's effectiveness and productivity. Australia is steadfast in our commitment to gender equality and women's economic empowerment. Australia's Minister for Women is also Australia's Minister for Employment, which underlines the link for us between gender and economics and employment. We also have further to go in our Department of Foreign Affairs, but we're making great strides in promoting gender equality. In New York, I'm the Deputy Permanent Representative. We have a female Permanent Representative, Gillian Bird, a female Foreign Minister in Australia, and our first female Secretary for the Department of Foreign Affairs. So some great role models for us. Finally, in our assistance overseas, we support innovative aid initiatives to promote gender equality and women's economic empowerment, particularly through the Gender Equality Fund that we've established at home. I'm very proud of our ongoing commitment that at least 80% of our aid investments, regardless of their objectives, will effectively address gender issues in their implementation. This shows our commitment to our issue. In conclusion, gender equality and women's empowerment is a priority for Australia. It's good for women, for families, for business and the economy, and Australia stands ready to work with you, Executive Director, to achieve gender equality and Planet 50/50 by 2030. Thank you.
Ms. Wilson, thank you. And next we'll hear from Mr. Vinicius Carvalho Pinheiro, who's a Special Representative to the United Nations and Director of International Labor Organization's Office for the United Nations.
Thank you so much. Happy Women's Day. The ILO is of course very happy that the World of Work has been chosen as this year's theme. Congratulations on this important event. And I think in the beginning, the PGA set the tone when he said that if we keep the business as usual pace of improvements on gender equality in the world of work, it will take 120 years for women to be equal to men in the labor markets. So that means that only by the year 2127, we'll be finally close the gender pay gap. So by the year 2100, the world will add 4 billion people to its population, reaching the level of 11.15 billion. By the year 2100, the very notion of work, as we know so far, will face the risk of extinction due to automation and advancements in technology. So we certainly cannot wait. We cannot wait that long. And the response needs to be bold and needs to be adaptable to the new emerging trends. There is a great disconnect today between the labor market reality and the expectations and perceptions of women and men about the women's participation in the labor force. And this is one of the core messages of a study that Gallup and the ILO are launching today as part of the celebrations of the International Women's Day. So this study is based on a survey that interviewed 149,000 people all over the world in 143 countries, covering 99% of the global workforce. So it's the first study of its kind. According to the survey, 70% of women would prefer to be working rather than staying home. And similarly, 66% of men say that women in their household should work. Certainly, there are profound differences in perceptions between countries and regions, but the bottom line is, while 70% of women would like to be working, only 49% are actually participating in the labor force. The survey also questioned women and men about the challenges for women to participate in the labor markets. And among the top three, and many of those were actually explored quite well during these panels. The first one is, of course, the balance between family and work. Many of them are afraid that they won't have time for the kids, they won't have time for the family if they engage in paid work. The second one is the lack of affordable childcare infrastructure. So this is clearly an element that's also related to the parental leave and other policies that could be put in place. The third one is violence. Many are just afraid to go to work because there's no safe transportation, and then when they go to work, they are harassed. So this appears prominently across all over the world, all the regions, as a very prominent factor. The lack of flexible hours, the flexible arrangements in terms of that also, of course, impede people to organize themselves better in terms of family work responsibilities. And finally, the lack of decent job opportunities. So the survey shows that access to decent jobs is what most women want and what most men want for women as well. So now it's time to push the gender equality accelerator and translate aspirations into reality. Happy Women's Day again. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And our foot is all the way on the accelerator. It's not letting go. Well, before our final performance, there are a couple of people that we'd like to thank. And if you can please stand up, and if I call your name, Aparna We also have Elvira, Anju, Sue, and Shivangi, all of you guys for organizing the event. These are the troops on the ground making all of this happen. So thank you, ladies. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite some Broadway singers to the stage for a musical performance. We heard Jana earlier. She's coming back. They're just fantastic. So you're in for a real treat. And we have with us Lily Cooper, Amari Hardin, Debbie Zhang, Tracy McDowell, and William Blake. And they are going to be performing the UN Women Anthem, One Woman, which was created to mark the occasion of UN Women's founding and performed at the inaugural. And it's fitting today that we close out with this song. Ladies and gentlemen, One Woman.
In Kigali, she wakes up, she makes a choice. In Hanoi, Natal, Ramallah, in Tangier, she takes a breath, lifts up her voice. In Lahore, La Paz, Kampala, though she's half a world away, something in me wants to say, we are one woman. You cry and I hear you. We are one woman. You hurt and I hurt too. We are one woman. Your hopes are mine, and we shall shine. But as she speaks the truth, she reaches out and teaches others how to.
In Jaipur, she gives her name. She lives without shame. Manila, Salta, and Boo. Oh, we're different as can be. We're connected, she with me.
We are one woman. Your courage keeps us strong. We are one woman. You sing, I sing along. We are one woman. Your dream
Congratulations. And won't you join us, please, to sing the UN Women's Anthem?
Clap along.
We are one woman. Your victories lift us all. We are one woman. You rise and I stand tall. We are one woman. Your dreams are mine. And we shall shine. We shall shine. We shall shine. Shine, shine, shine. We shall shine. Shine, shine,
Yes, we shall shine.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the honor of having you. And I have to ask you to give a very big round of applause to our fantastic anchor, Shade Barinwe.
soon. First, thank you for being here today with us. Thank you for leading the resistance. Thank you. We're so lucky here to be led by Leader Pelosi, who is a fearless champion for women, for children, for people everywhere in our own country and throughout the world. Thank you, Leader Pelosi. Also, I must thank Congresswoman Catherine Clark for helping bring us together and for her bold leadership in Congress. Thank you, Catherine. Let's also give a round of applause to the Democratic Women's Working Group led by Congresswoman Lois Frankel, Congresswoman Brenda Lawrence, Congresswoman Jackie Spear, as well as our Democratic Caucus Vice Chair, Congresswoman Linda Sanchez, and Congresswoman Sherry Bustos, who is helping lead our caucus through the Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Thank you all, my sisters and brothers. One thing is clear, warrior women here throughout the country on Capitol Hill are standing up for equality and justice. Equality and justice. We are resisting President Trump and congressional Republicans and letting them know that we will not go back. We will not go back. Today we are here on International Women's Day to declare once and for all that women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. We walked out today for a day without women to send a clear message. We stand with our sisters across the country who have walked out in defense of equal rights for women. We also recognize that there are millions of women who are unable to walk out because they may get fired or cannot afford to lose their meager incomes. So we walked out for them too. We are raising our voices for the millions of women who can't. Today, women of the Congressional Black Caucus are wearing black flowers in resistance to President Trump's assault on communities of color and women of color. It's an outrage that women of color continue to be at the bottom of the economic ladder in America. We work twice as hard for half the pay. We fight day in and day out to keep the government from restricting our reproductive rights. We are brutalized and demoralized by our criminal justice system. And despite the fact that women of color turned out in large numbers to vote than any other group, our civil, human, and women's rights remain under attack. They remain under attack. I don't know about you, my sisters. Yes, I do know about you. We walked out to say enough is enough. Enough is enough. And so we demand that women, including women of color, be paid a living wage and equal wage for their hard work. We demand an end to discriminatory abortion restrictions that disproportionately affect low-income women and women of color. We reject Republican attempts to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which has provided life-saving health care to women of color across the country. And we are demanding once and for all that women of color receive equal justice under the law. Equal justice under the law. Finally, let me just say, Shirley Chisholm, my mentor and the first African-American woman to be elected from Congress from Brooklyn, New York. Shirley used to say, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Bring a folding chair. Well, we brought our folding chairs and we're here to say once and for all, we will not be moved. We will not be moved. So thank you for your courage. Thank you for resisting this anti-woman, un-American Trump agenda. It gives me great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Congresswoman Catherine Clark, who is a champion for civil and human rights, who helped lead the sit-in on the House floor to protest Republican inaction on common sense gun reforms. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be with you. You are a beautiful sight. And thank you to Barbara Lee, whose leadership and organization, the things that she champions, are the reason that we are here today. She is our Shiro, and we thank you, Barbara Lee. And today we stand in solidarity with women across the globe who face the daily threat of violence and death simply because they are women. More girls have been killed in the last 50 years precisely because they were girls than men were killed in all the wars in the 20th century. 1 in 3 women across the world will experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. We are here today to fight to save the lives of women and girls at home and abroad. We're here for the millions of women and children who are bought and sold as victims of human trafficking. For the 200 million women and girls alive today who've been subjected to genital mutilation, and the millions of women and girls across the world who are living with HIV and AIDS. We stand today in solidarity against this administration's draconian cuts to foreign aid, hurting the most vulnerable women in the world. We are here to fight an administration and a Republican Congress that targets our families and with backwards and divisive policies, like the administration's plan to cut funding for the Office of Violence Against Women, or the cruel and sickening proposal to rip immigrant children from their mothers at the border, and the anti-immigrant policies that force victims of domestic violence and sexual assault to hide in the shadows. We stand today with transgender women who are among the most at risk for violence, murder, unemployment, and poverty. We know the deadly connection